Let me put no, okay. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to CAC meeting number 4. Thank you so much for coming. We do appreciate your time. Before we get into the main objectives of the meeting, we first would like to go over the protocols, the meeting protocols. So if you look at the screen, when you are speaking, please show your video. You may turn off the video after you speak. We will adhere to the meeting start and end times. So it's good for us to be, everyone to be efficient with their time. Respect everyone's opinion. We will document all perspectives we receive from everybody. You can place any question in the chat so that when we get to question and answer, we can be able to address them. After the presentation, there will be time for discussions. So we want people to pay attention to what we're presenting. Then at the end, we'll be able to have that discussion. Please use the raise hand function within the WebEx to raise your hand, if you have any question. At the end of the meeting, we shall post all meeting presentation materials in the website. I would also like to let you know that this is an open meeting. It's open to the public. Other people might be able to tune in, and everything presented is recorded. If you have any problem during any technical issue during the meeting, please call 202-997-8354. Next slide, please. With regards to muting and speaking on the meeting, everyone is on mute as well as the presentation is going on. You can unmute yourself. We can unmute you during the open discussion period. This helps to ensure that meeting runs smoothly and we hear everything that people are saying. The WebEx has an automatic closed caption during the meeting. Click the CC icon in the lower left corner of the window. There's an additional setting, so you may be able to adjust appearances of the caption if needed. Using the WebEx mobile application, click on the third dot icon, scroll down and select the closed captions. Make sure the toggle switch is blue. The video camera is off by default and you will not be able to share video. Next slide. For raising hand, if you go to the bottom, you see a raise hand symbol and then click on it. The red arrow is pointing to it. Next slide, please. Question and answer. To send a question, click on the three dots icon in the bottom and select Q&A. Any new panel or window will appear in the Ask field. Select all panelists. If you join through via a browser or mobile app, click the Q&A or question mark icon to access Q&A. Next slide. Now, we are looking at the main objectives of tonight's meeting. We would like to get, if you look at the map, you see segment 1, segment 2, segment 3. The primary objective of tonight's meeting is to get your feedback on segment 3 to see what you would like to see on Pennsylvania Avenue. We'll have different treatment options we'll be discussing with you. and we would like to get your feedback to help us inform what happens to the rest of the corridor. This is about 4.3-mile corridor. So the feedback we get tonight on segment 3, north of Pennsylvania Avenue, will help us to decide what you would like to see in the rest of the corridor. Next slide, please. Before we get into it, I would like to introduce the project team. There has been some changes since we met in March during the public meeting. We used to have IJ as the project manager, but she's no longer with DDOT. Currently, the PM, the project manager, and Preston is the deputy project manager. We also have Tyler Williams, who is the community engagement branch manager, and then Keith Jones, who is the Ward 8 engagement specialist. If you look at the slide, this is a list of all the community advisory committee members. When we get to the question and answer or answering the chat, before you speak, we would like you to introduce yourself and tell us what your concerns or interests you would like to see with this project. Next slide, please. This is the general update since we last met in March. In spring of 2024, we had a public meeting. Summer 2024, we've been reviewing all the comments we received from the public meeting. We've been evaluating the information relative to the alternatives we presented. Today, fall 2024, which is this meeting we're having now, we are trying to get your feedback on segment 3 so that we know what we will use to carry to move forward with the project. Winter 2024, we will revise the concepts, all the concepts based on the comments we received today. And spring summer, we would like to finalize, spring 2025, we'll be finalizing the project and the concepts. With that, I would like to hand over to Preston.
All right, thanks, Gabe. Good evening, folks. As Gabe said, my name is Preston Judy. I am the Deputy Project Manager for the Alabama Avenue project. So going to start off, we are, as Gabe said, the focus of tonight is to get some specific feedback from the CAC members and folks who are viewing tonight about segment 3, so about that area north of Pennsylvania Avenue specifically. But we're going to go through some project refreshers, recap a little bit from the public meeting that will inform us and get into that conversation. And I just off the top want to kind of specifically talk about the reason we want to talk about some specific alternatives and discuss this segment in detail is based on some of the public feedback that we've been reviewing since we had those meetings, and some of the potential concerns that I'll highlight in a few slides. There's some potential alternatives that, based on the feedback we get here and then through our continued outreach, depending on the path we choose to go there, it could open us up to other options and considerations elsewhere in the corridor. But because some of the specific makeups of this specific segment 3 north of Pennsylvania Avenue to the right on the screen here, that will really help us set the tone and make some of those revisions and changes moving forward. So that's why we're really keying on that tonight. So with that, some project refreshers here. So as Gabe said, we've got a 4.3-mile corridor all the way from MLK Avenue Southeast in Ward 8 to Ridge Road to the east here. And the main purpose of this study is to improve safety. And what does that mean in the context of this study? It means reducing serious injuries and fatalities from crashes, improving accessibility for pedestrians, and improving bus reliability. And so that everything that we talk through and that we always are keying back to this, which is it improving safety? And that is what we're holding paramount here. Now, a quick, let me go back real quick, apologies there. Now, some refreshers of how we got here. And the top line here is that Alabama Avenue, as it stands now, really just isn't working, and for two main reasons: crashes and speeding. So on the screen now, you can see a heat map of crashes on Alabama Avenue. And Alabama Avenue is what we call Tier 1 in our high injury network. So it's our highest priority, which means based on serious injuries and fatalities and crashes, it's of highest concern. It's particularly unsafe. And so what that means is from these data years, so 2018 to 2022, we saw on average over 250 crashes per year. There were 5 fatalities between 2018 and 2021, and we know there have been more serious injuries and fatalities since then. So Alabama, the simple part of that is Alabama Avenue, as it stands now, just isn't working from a safety perspective, and we have to take a look at how we can change that and improve that. Now, speeding specifically, I've got some data here to support it, but I know for anyone that drives, walks, scoots, takes the bus anywhere along this corridor, speeding is a very serious issue that we all see and witness. I'm calling out 2 spots here where we got some specific data. So on the left, right here between Stanton Road and 18th Street, so that's over by the near the Giant, between 50 and 95% of all vehicles that went through that block based on the speed data in 2022 were going 5 to 10 miles per hour higher than the posted speed limit. And then on this other segment, so that's from 25th Street to 36th Place, 60 to 75% of vehicles that drove through that corridor were going 10 miles per hour higher than the posted speed limit when we collected data. So it's not just a feeling. We know from the data that we have really serious speeding concerns along the corridor as well, which are seriously contributing to those safety concerns. Now, off the top, I kind of want to discuss sort of what we call our safety treatment toolbox. And so this is something across the entire corridor, but really on all of our safety projects like this, that is our toolbox that I call it sort of an all above the approach, but an all of the above approach, where we can take these different pieces and when we stitch it together throughout the corridor, it's going to help address some of those safety concerns. But I want to walk through some of those specific items that we heard from folks both at the public meeting and since then of, why are we doing this? How is this specific treatment that I'm seeing going to help address my safety concerns? And how is it going to make me feel safer? How is it going to get people to slow down? So I'm going to walk through a couple of those that you've seen in the draft plans that we have posted online and that we continue to use as part of this toolbox to address safety issues. So first and foremost, we have crosswalk visibility. The 2 main things that we really focus in on there when trying to make crosswalks visible are signage and pavement markings, calling attention to drivers that they know that pedestrians might be crossing, and for pedestrians that drivers, this is a conflict zone, so please be aware. And 2, and this is one we've heard a lot of questions about and we want to continue to respond, is prohibiting parking within 25 feet of a crosswalk. So I know there are places where people may be parking right up against the crosswalk. It's actually not allowed. That's not legal parking. And this graphic on the right, for me, is a really great explanation of just why that's so important and why that's an absolute must for us along the entire corridor in implementing safety treatments. So you can see on the right side, when someone's parked right up against the curb and a vehicle's coming with a pedestrian maybe waiting to cross at the side, when vehicles are parked right up against the crosswalk, the driver really can't see, or it's very difficult to see a pedestrian until essentially they're already at the crosswalk. And so when someone add in speeding, add in weather, that gives limited time and for someone to respond in a safe manner. So for the driver to slow down or for the pedestrian to recognize that a car is coming and to maybe stop and wait for that to pass. And so by setting the vehicles back, and giving that extra visibility, what that does is give the driver more time to respond, give the pedestrian more time to respond, and it just feeds into that same overall goal of awareness for both pedestrians and drivers, as well as visibility, which is really kind of the key parts of all of these treatments. The next one, curb extensions. From the public meetings and from engagement, we've had some questions about these. Have another graphic here and some visuals to help explain why we implement those and why they help with safety. So the 3 top line items with curb extensions, they improve visibility. So very similar to what I showed on the previous slide with just at a crosswalk. Curb extensions have a very similar effect, but right at an intersection. So they improve visibilities by expanding the sidewalk and clearing the space for drivers to see pedestrians. They slow drivers as they turn around through the intersection. So in this graphic, you can see, right, pulling it out, it forces a driver to make a turn at more of a 90-degree angle, which they have to navigate slower. So these extensions are designed in a way that you can safely make those turns and there is space to do so, but you have to navigate it more slowly, which is safer for all folks involved. And another added benefit is that it actually shortens the crossing distance for pedestrians. So in this graphic, you can see going from the existing one, going in 5, 6, 7 feet on either side. It's going to depend on the certain circumstances. That adds up on both sides for a shorter distance for pedestrians to cross, which is less exposure to vehicles and less exposure to potential crash risk. And so it helps with that visibility, and it really gives that extra feet. When I think of it here, I think of every foot counts. And so if someone's running out into the street, maybe a child is playing, 5, 6, 7 feet gives that extra time here to let a driver see them, 5 or 6 extra feet for them to make that safe decision and slow down and not go into the street. So this is a really important part of our toolbox for those reasons. Median refuge islands, they have a lot of similar benefits, and you'll see them in different parts of the corridor in our draft treatment plans. They have a similar effect, so they do shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians by breaking it up, but they also give a safe place to wait in the middle to make sure it's safe for traffic to be paused to cross in both directions. They also slow drivers as they turn, so similar to the curb extensions. When making turns, they can force drivers to have to make more of a 90-degree turn and to go more slowly. And in certain situations, context specific, depending on maybe utilities or maybe drainage concerns, there are times where a median refuge island in the center, sort of at the crest of the road, if you will, may be easier for technical reasons to address those safety concerns, but for drainage and other reasons, it may be the more technically feasible solution to improve safety. Now I'm going to go into 2 crossing treatments that we hear a lot about. We've had folks request this at some of the public meetings and ask about how do these things work. So the first one is called the HAC signal. So that stands for High Intensity Activated Crosswalk. Put simply, it's a pedestrian activated stoplight. You'll see below these, I've provided a link here that'll take you to our Vision Zero website that goes into more detail about all of these treatments, but this graphic is great. It explains for both the pedestrian and driver just how it works. So when I, as a pedestrian, am approaching, I press the button, and what that does is essentially initiate a process to have this function like a traffic signal. So it's going to start flashing the yellow light, it's going to warn the driver that someone's waiting to cross, and then it's going to put on the full red signal, have it be essentially like a temporarily activated traffic signal, and then it will start to flash red again to then clear to be inactivated when someone hasn't pressed it for traffic to go through again. We use these at intersections where maybe there's multiple lanes, it's higher traffic, maybe there's a lot of pedestrian activity, but it may not meet the federal process that we have to follow to implement a full traffic signal. So this is sort of an alternative to facilitate that safe crossing, but where it may not be warranted to do a full traffic signal. Similarly, and we see these in a lot of locations throughout the district near where we have crosswalks, are what we call rectangular rapid flashing beacons, or RRFBs. So different from a HAC signal, these are not actually traffic control. So they are intended to alert drivers and pedestrians, but particularly drivers, that a pedestrian is waiting to cross. So what that's going to do is light up these signs, and again, increase that awareness, increase that visibility, so drivers know, hey, somebody's trying to cross here, I'm supposed to yield, and it really enforces that process. So we typically implement these where we see lots of drivers failing to yield to stop for pedestrians. I experience this myself. We see this all across the corridor and elsewhere in the district. And so we can add those to it crosswalks and really just reinforce that fact that this is a mixing zone. Folks want to cross here, and it is the driver's responsibility to yield and allow pedestrians to cross. These flashing signs help with that. Now, walk through the safety treatments. That's something you'll see throughout our plans. I want to harken back to the public meetings we had in March and share with you some of the biggest topics and areas of discussion that we heard from all of you and from the community, and that will feed into sort of the specific discussion that we want to have about segment 3, the area north of Pennsylvania Avenue, and why we think that's a good area for discussion to get some specific feedback to consider how to incorporate this feedback. So the 3 areas we come through all of the comments. We had, sticky notes on the boards. We heard from folks live, and we've heard emails and other concerns from folks since then that we've taken into account. The 3 areas that we really have seen across all of these when we synthesize it to the main 3 points are traffic calming and speeding. So we kind of see those as the same part. So traffic calming is naturally a response to speeding, like I showed from the data too. It's very clearly a big concern, and folks have reiterated to that to us over and over again. Emergency vehicles and medians. I have spoken directly with some community members, both at those public meetings, via email and on the phone, that some of the median treatments that we're proposing, that folks have concerns about what that's going to look like and maybe how emergency vehicles might respond to that. And so they want to know that we're taking that into account and that our design will accommodate that, as well as these safety treatments that we talked about. And the third one is bike lanes and parking. And so with that one specifically, and really with all of these being the top line topics, doesn't mean that we heard all of the same thing about each of these topics. It just means that we heard a lot about it, and really the most about it across these different things. So with bike lanes, we heard a lot of requests for bike lanes and for safe places to, when I say roll the term, says it's not just bikes, but we have bikes, we have scooters, we have wheelchairs and strollers where folks are out there with devices with wheels and they need the extra space. We've heard a lot of requests for safe places to do that. We've also heard concerns about parking, specifically with like particularly Saturday and Sunday parking. Just because a specific row of parking might be underutilized throughout the week, doesn't mean that there aren't other concerns and times of demand outside of that. And so we also want to take that into account. I've highlighted a couple. These are direct quotes maybe from some of y'all on the call, but that we heard at the public meeting. So kind of reiterating, calming traffic may be inconvenient, but it saves lives. To the second point, fire trucks need to be able to respond to residents. This third one, the purple one, this is really informed this process and why we're getting the specific feedback on segment 3, but consider a shared use path to avoid loss of parking. And so this really comes into play on that segment 3, where we have bike lanes under existing conditions, just painted unprotected bike lanes. And we're currently proposing protected bike lanes. And so multiple folks have flagged this, and with the comment directly below it as well that I talked about, which is, are there ways for us to consider these safety needs, to balance these different needs, right? We've got a lot of interest in folks across all these categories and across all of these interests. We may have folks on the opposite side of that, that some folks want more bike facilities, some folks are very concerned about parking. Are there alternative ways we can look at the solution that balances those and meets all of the needs? And that's why we want to walk through some of these alternative configurations. Before we get into the specifics of segment 3, the area, the corridor specifically north of Pennsylvania Avenue, I do just want to touch on our approach to plan revisions broadly. So just because we are focusing in tonight on that specific segment, because we really think it will inform and maybe open up some options for incorporating revisions further in the corridor, doesn't mean that we are not incorporating comments from the CAC members and from the community elsewhere. So like I said, when walking through our treatment toolbox, safety is first. So like the safety toolbox that I referenced, where technically feasible when looking at those different options, and we're looking on that website, there may be other opportunities or other treatment devices that might be appropriate. Where it's technically feasible, we want to use the public preferred treatment as long as it still addresses the underlying safety issue. So particularly, curb extensions versus those median refuge islands, for instance. If folks along a specific segment, we all recognize there's speeding, we all recognize that there's crossing concerns and safety issues. If there's just a preference there, as long as it is technically feasible and we feel adequately addresses those safety concerns, we want to be flexible and we want to respond to the community's needs and preferences to be able to adequately address these issues. So that's one that I want to specifically note. I do want to have one comment there because we have had folks, and I want to emphasize the technically feasible. Folks have asked us about speed humps and other what we call vertical traffic calming. So where we implement humps tables to slow folks down because they've got to drive over something. Unfortunately for Alabama Avenue specifically, because of its what we call functional classification, so which means because it's a major road, because it's an arterial, we're not able to do speed humps and other vertical traffic calming devices because of the volume of traffic that we have coming through here. So, but I just want to reiterate, just because we can't use that specific tool in the safety treatment toolbox, we have these other options that when we put together in that all of the above approach, we do think will adequately address those safety concerns, bring down speeds, have folks more visible and aware of other, and increase the safety here. Going into, again, our overall approach, reflecting a little bit on some of the comments we've heard from medians, and I'm calling out this specific segment by Bard High School and the cemetery. Where we're currently in the plans, we've looked for these opportunities, but where we're currently proposing medians, what we want to do is essentially, and when I'm saying that, where we have extra space, right? We're considering medians here because we have extra space across the cross section to implement safety treatments, but we want to prioritize bringing sidewalks and the tree boxes up to standard before we look at using the space for the median treatments. And part of that is we think one of the most important safety treatments is to have a safe sidewalk with a tree box that meets our standards, that provides a safe place to walk and be away from traffic. And we think that's, one of, if not the most important tools, is having safe and adequate facilities to walk for all folks. And then lastly, we want to really key in and only adding in dedicated turning lanes, if it's necessary to accommodate bus routing, especially, again, going back to its objectives, bus routing to make sure the bus service is reliable and for acceptable traffic conditions. But we also don't want to over-engineer the solutions. We don't want to have excessively wide intersections. We don't want to have unnecessary lanes for pedestrians and other folks to cross that opens them up for those potential crash risk and other exposure. So we want to be selective. We want to be focused in on it serving a purpose. So we want all of these treatments and the infrastructure that we're implementing to be for a purpose, for facilitating traffic and bus service, for increasing safety. And so we want to be very mindful of making sure that it is necessary and going to further our overall purpose and objectives of improving safety. Now, I'm going to walk through, this is where we're getting into the meat of our conversation tonight, and where we want to get some specific thoughts and really understand, do any of these alternatives, are they of interest? Is this approach that we should take as we look through how we can revise the proposed treatments that we've already presented? So focusing in on segment 3 here. So here's the overall 4.3 mile corridor. Segment 3 is specifically Pennsylvania Avenue to Bowen and Ridge Road Southeast. So it's the existing segment where we already have the bike lane. So what that looks like is 44 feet from curb to curb across the roadway. We have 2 travel lanes, so 1 travel lane in each direction. It makes 2 travel lanes. 2 7-foot parking lanes, so 1 parking lane on either side, and then 2 5-foot bike lanes. So that's 1 bike lane going in each direction. What we haven't had a conversation about as part of this project really is the fact that the right-of-way along this corridor, but particularly in segment 3, where this is what it looks like, is much larger than what we've talked about here between the curbs. So there are portions of Alabama Avenue in this segment where up to 150 feet is still the public right-of-way. So between opposite property lines, where we haven't necessarily discussed, are there other ways that we could accommodate some of these needs to have a safe place to bike, scoot, get out on a stroller, that maybe is not between the curbs. And we want to fully explore those options and get your thoughts if those are worth pursuing, particularly because it could change our approach elsewhere in the corridor about how to balance those needs and concerns. Now, existing conditions, I'm going to walk us through some different cross sections, and I want to kind of illustrate what that looks like here. So this is the existing corridor. When I talk about that larger right-of-way, what I'm talking about, and I used one specific spot for this instance. So I went to our map, I looked at the 3900 block of Alabama. So that's Alabama, just north/northeast of Pennsylvania Avenue between R and Q Street. I looked at that specific segment and looked at how big is that right-of-way, so we could really get an understanding of what the public space is here. So while the 44 feet we just looked at is here, in some spots, we have, upwards of 144 feet that's still considered the public right-of-way. So we've got the bike lanes, parking lanes, and travel lanes. We've got our tree boxes and our sidewalk, but we also have these areas when we have large right-of-way like this that we call public parking. And so that's the area from the back of the sidewalk to the actual property line of the adjacent homeowners or property owners. So we have these large areas that we haven't necessarily discussed to potentially consider, balancing these different needs of, is there somewhere in the public parking potentially that there might be a place for a path or another alternative that's safe for someone to bike, but that we can also balance those concerns about parking and access for churches and other destinations along the corridor. And so just some specifics here again to touch on what is public parking. I'm not going to play this video. I did provide this link here. This is a video from a different project that really explains those nuances of public parking and the right-of-way. But specifically, again, another image on this graphic, this D right here, so landscaped public parking. This is space that is in front of people's houses. They might think it's their yard, but it's actually still the public right-of-way. So it's public parking, it's public space that is landscaped and meant to be beautiful and landscaped and vegetated, but it is actually public space. And so this is the area where we haven't necessarily explored yet of, are there other ways to facilitate these different concerns using the area particularly closest to the back end of the sidewalk. And that's what I want to walk us through of what those potential alternatives could look like and get thoughts and understand from the CAC and from community members tuning in, is that worth pursuing? So specifically at that same section that I took this cross section, so the 3900 block of Alabama, I want to give you a specific example here and let you understand exactly what that looks like. So this is that 3900 block in Alabama. This is Fort Davis Park. There's that basketball court right over there. And I've provided this map where you can see this is Alabama Avenue, the curb to curb. You can see the parking lane, the bike lane, the two travel lanes, and again, bike lane and parking lane again. These yellow lines, these yellowish orangish lines are the actual adjacent property lines. And so with these houses on the bottom side, so the plan south that we've got here, there's all of this space in front that visually looks like a front yard, but it's that public parking that we referred to. And you can see the view from the street where those property lines, again, while it may look like you're already crossing out a public space by the time you're off the sidewalk, the property line on the north side there on the park side is actually almost to the basketball hoop. And then on the south side here, in the public parking adjacent to the homes, it actually doesn't, the property line starts closer to like folks' front porches and stoops. So there's this extra space that we haven't necessarily discussed yet that could address some of these concerns that we've heard from folks and adequately address the safety at the same time. Now, again, existing conditions. So we're going to focus in tonight on that, the homeowner side, so the public parking in front of the houses. The suggestion that we've heard from, one suggestion that we looked into initially from the community was we did explore the park side, and so we did sort of like a virtual scan and like an understanding of what does that look like. We think there are more obstructions along the corridor for segment 3 on that north side, like really large heritage trees. There's some different fences and other bricks and retaining walls. We think there are more obstructions on the north side that based on that preliminary scan that we think the south side is going to be the more technically feasible side where it's generally flatter slopes. There are fewer obstructions where we think we can have more discussions about different alternatives here, potentially using the public parking. So for tonight's discussion, we're going to focus in specifically on that area. When this project goes through design, however, there's always, we'll get into the more detailed parts in design. So some of these distances and some of these dimensions that you'll see here, these are based on our guidance and our design and engineering manual for sort of our minimums that we need for bike lanes, for drive lanes, for parking lanes. But they may fluctuate a little bit as we get further into the design process when we have more detailed surveys and learn about other obstructions and other details. They may move a little bit, 7 feet may become 7.5 feet, 5 feet, maybe 6 feet, but this is generally roughly what we have space for and roughly what's out there currently. So this is existing conditions. I showed you what that looks like from a person's view. This is that cross section. So generally speaking, again, We have sufficient sidewalks and tree boxes for the most part along segment 3, along the more park-like area. And on the park side, it is generally underutilized on-street parking. Now, I don't want to negate the fact that it is used on Saturdays and Sundays and for events, but based on the data that we've seen and anecdotally from folks, it is generally underutilized. There is a lot of available space on that park side. So in the current plan, so with the plans that we've already shared and that we presented and walked through with folks in March, we're currently proposing protected bike lanes. And so this is what that cross section looks like based on the current plan. So this is one option to facilitate a safe place for people to bike, scoot, and so on. So what that would look like is using the same 44 feet from curb to curb. We would repurpose that underutilized parking lane along the park. So that's along that north side over here, if you can see my mouth. We would repurpose that side for a protected bike lane, maintain the 2 travel lanes and a side of parking on the homeowner side. And then we would basically flip the parking in the bike lane, and that allows us to protect people using that bike lane to be safer from crash risk and from other things. And we wouldn't touch beyond the curb in this current proposal. So this is currently what's in our plans. One specific benefit that protected bike lanes and that generally narrowing the traveled way, so narrowing travel lanes, what that does is slows folks down. So we know from research and from data that narrowing travel lanes and narrowing the overall space, making sure we don't have excessively wide travel lane, that slows people down. Speed is often a contributing factor to crashes, and so it ends up reducing crashes as well. So I just want to make sure to really emphasize, these are protected bike lanes and they are safe for people that want to use those outside of a car, but they do also have safety benefits for folks that are driving and may not even be using these bike lanes. They do make it safer for everyone to use this road as well. So this is one option. One of the key points you can see, there's no changes to sidewalks and green space. So there's also the added downside of we're not increasing green space or increasing tree coverage with this proposal here. We're just repurposing and rethinking differently about how we might use the space. So here's some examples. I pulled this example from the National Mall of a protected bike lane project that we have elsewhere in the district. So I've got a street view on the left and then an aerial view on the right. It's very similar to the cross section that we just showed here. So, you know, on the Alabama Avenue example, we were talking about a travel lane in each direction with a parking lane on the side. So if you can imagine, this were the homeowners on the south side. This is like Fort Davis Park on the north side. We would have the protected bike lane. Instead of a parking lane that's there currently, we'd have a travel lane. This median would be the travel lane instead, and this would be parking and then the protected bike lane. So this is what it could look like, how we currently have it proposed. Now, these are great because they separate users. You know, they could still maintain the 2 travel lanes, which for traffic purposes has negligible impacts because it's the same level of capacity for vehicles driving. And it works well, like I said, when we have underutilized road space. So when we have underutilized parking in other places where we maybe have more lanes than we need to facilitate traffic, it's great for those instances where we can afford to think about space differently. Now, I'm going to get into some of these alternatives. So the 2 main things that we're going to see in a couple of different configurations are a shared use path and a separated trail. And so again, we want to focus in on addressing these different needs and concerns that we've heard from the community and the real safety concerns that we're seeing based on the data and lived experiences. But we want to look at potential alternative configurations that maybe can still balance those needs in a different way and see if people are open to the idea of it. So this first concept is a shared use path with a median. And so the key difference here is, instead of having protected bike lanes, what we could potentially do is repurpose the extra space between the curbs. So in this concept, we wouldn't change the curbs. They would stay where they are. It would still be 44 feet from curb to curb. We could use 4 feet, so you'll see on the right, we could expand the sidewalk 4 feet into the public parking, so towards the homeowners where the property lines further over here to the right. By adding just at least 4 feet, we have to have 10 feet minimum to have a shared use path. We could facilitate a safe place to bike, scooter, be on a wheelchair, be out with a stroller, and still have a parking lane on the park side. And so what this would do is, with the excess space that currently is with painted bike lanes, we could potentially add vegetation along the corridor in a median, which would have it feel more park-like. It would increase tree canopy. Experiencing the heat wave this summer, that's something that could definitely be a benefit for all of us. And having more permeable spaces, so having more space where it's not concrete, where it's not asphalt, is helpful in big rainstorm events where having more space for water to seep in has added benefits as well outside of some of those safety concerns. And again, by just using 4 feet going into that public parking, we still have that place that would be sufficiently wide for folks to use alternative modes of transportation and walk as well. So that's one alternative. I want to give some examples that show median treatment specifically here elsewhere in the district that also addresses some of those concerns that we heard from the public meeting and that I've spoken directly with some people about. So this is an example from Capitol Hill on Maryland Avenue Northeast specifically. You can see on the left is a vegetated median, and this example, maybe for design reasons, they maybe didn't have quite enough space where they wanted to do, where they could do trees in this specific instance, but they were still able to do a vegetated median that would help with more permeable space, helping those, to reduce runoff and localized flooding in those instances. And then on the right, and it's actually the same spot, but turned around, so this is over near Stanton Park, you can see where for, I'm not sure the origin of this specific one, whether it was in responding to concerns from fire EMS or elsewhere, but we do have options in select locations to do what we call a traversable median. So where we're still putting in a median treatment to discourage illegal passing, right? I see it. Anytime I've driven on Alabama Avenue, I've seen at least one driver go around the yellow line in an unsafe manner. So this can still be a way to help address that behavior and increase safety, but address those concerns where in emergencies, an ambulance or a fire truck can still navigate that and get around traffic. So we want to make sure we're clear that just because we're having medians doesn't mean we're not going to be flexible and respond to the context. We want to find a way to balance those concerns where medians do reduce crashes and increase safety, but we want to also make sure we're facilitating those emergency vehicles and those concerns from the community. So this is one way that we could potentially do that. Now, an alternative way, so we could implement, and I'm going to abbreviate it here, so a shared use path, if you see SUP, that's what that means. Another way that we could reconfigure the space is to, instead of having a median treatment, again, we've heard some concerns from folks. Some people just don't like medians, and we understand that. Some people really like them. One alternative would be to, again, use just 4 extra feet from, approximately just 4 extra feet from the existing sidewalk into the public parking. That gets us the 10-foot minimum shared use path. That's a safe place to use alternative modes of transportation like bikes, scooters, et cetera. But instead of doing a median, what we could do is move the curbs out and actually narrow the overall curb to curb width. So we'd expand the tree boxes. So another way to get the safe facility that we feel is comfortable and safe for people who want to bike and scoot, but it has the added benefit of increasing those permeable surfaces, which helps with stormwater management. The caveat, 2 caveats actually that I would say here is we're not increasing the tree canopy. So that's one potential downside if that's something that's really important to folks. And when we get to the design process, sometimes, not always, but when I've talked to some of our engineers about this, moving out the curbs can sometimes have more technical difficulties when we get into the process. So sometimes, whether for utilities or whether for drainage, roads are slightly crested in the middle and then they drain to the sides. So this can have bigger drainage implications that can sometimes complicate the design process. Doesn't mean we can't do it. Doesn't mean it's not a consideration that we could do, but it could just mean that from the planning process to the design process, there could potentially be some changes and hiccups along the way that require us to respond to those local issues that tweak the design where it may be a little more difficult and different from what we were initially expecting. So I want to have that caveat, but it doesn't mean that it's not an option. Now, some specific examples. So again, I want to give some examples of all these where they already exist in the district. This is Michigan Avenue Northeast by Catholic University. So you can see here on the left from the street view and above from the arrow view, this is a wider path, right? We have to have it at least 10 feet where typically we would probably only expect like a 4-foot tree box. So the area between the curb and the path, and a 6-foot sidewalk, right? There's not, high levels of retail and lots of pedestrian traffic right along this corridor, like we might see in a more commercial area. But what we do is widen it beyond what we would typically expect so that there's a place that's, again, safe for walking and safe for wheelchair strollers, bikes, and scooters, but we're not using the space between the curbs, so we can still balance those other concerns and needs for parking and traffic and so on. And you can see above, this is great when the public right-of-way is limited, or maybe there's a desire to minimize changes behind the sidewalk. We sort of minimize how much extra space we need, and maybe we don't have as much space in another location where we have that really large public parking. That allows us to use just that 4 extra feet to get through and use that space. And I'm sorry, I'm going to move a little bit quickly because I want to make sure we have time for open discussion as well. I'm going to move into sort of what I call, they're very similar, but I call these sort of the premium plus options. So again, there's still a median or a narrowing in the roadway, or sorry, making the tree boxes bigger, but there's potentially an option to not just have the shared use path. Maybe you don't want to share that space with more recreational users that may be passing through along the corridor. Maybe you want to have a separated place to walk and have a separate sidewalk. This is another option. So again, same curb to curb width with a median could be an option. But we would actually, instead of just the 4 feet right here in purple, instead of just the 4 feet to get to a shared use path, what we could actually do is add in another tree box, so add in another line of trees, and then have that 6-foot sidewalk like we have now, but move it in. And so what that looks like is 14 extra feet instead of 4 extra feet. Now, again, in this specific location, the example I'm using along Alabama Avenue, that still leaves a pretty large space, 20, 30 plus, 20 to 30 feet of, quote unquote yard. Again, it's public parking, it's not yard space, but could get us those nice separated facilities and an extra line of trees. And so that could be an upside. Maybe folks are more interested in having that extra tree and separating the more recreational and casual users of a sidewalk. And then again, that same alternative where it could be separated, but we could move out the tree, expand the tree boxes and do not a median instead. That would still address those different concerns. And I want to provide a specific example here where that's also been done in the district. So Virginia Avenue Southeast and Navy Yard, you can see here, very similar to what we're proposing. They have a parking lane on each side, a travel lane in each direction, and then they've done that same thing where they've got what we call the tree box or the furnishing zone for signs and trees and so on. They have a separated trail, so that goes in both directions for bikes, scooters, and so on. And then they've got a little bit of a gap and a sidewalk. So where we've got small obstructions, maybe it's a smaller gap where we don't fit trees, but just a little bit of separation. But then they still have that separate sidewalk. And in this example, you can see the right-of-way, the property line, so the public parking area, still pretty wide to have almost a park-like environment in front of them, in front of that public space, while separating the sidewalk and the trail. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to share a different screen. And what we're going to do is I've got a live poll that we're going to use, and we're going to open it up for discussion. And we want to start with CAC members, and like Gabe referenced in the beginning, we would love for you to introduce yourself, maybe share your primary, what your area of focus is, or maybe your primary concerns and what you'd like to hear from us. And we'd love to also get your specific feedback on these different alternatives. So I'm going to reshare my screen, and I've actually got a live poll that we're going to use. So I've got my screen sharing again. Let me know if you can't see that. While we have this discussion, starting with the CAC members, and if we're efficient for our time, we'd like to also address comments, in the Q&A in the chat. I can't see it personally while I'm sharing my screen, but we want to try our best to get to everyone before 8 p.m. What I'd love for folks to do is we really want to understand, what are your preferences here? Do we want to stick with the protected bike lanes? Are you interested and open to these other options that could help us balance some of those different needs and concerns that we've heard from the community while addressing those safety concerns? So what you can do is on your phone, if you want to focus on this on your computer screen, you can scan this QR code, or you can go to slido.com and enter this number at the top. And what it's going to do is bring up a survey where you can click and rank these. So when you pull it up, these same options will show up, and you'll click them in the order that you like them best. So if you really like that premium plus separated trail with a median and the separate sidewalk, you would click that first and then click through in the order that you like the best. So right before we open the discussion, I'm just going to do it myself real quick so we can see it populate and show that it's live. And I want to leave this up through our discussion. I want to have a free-flowing discussion. Maybe you start this conversation, we start this discussion, you're leaning one way and we hear different perspectives, and maybe you lean another way after that, or maybe you want to stick with your initial view. So I'm going to leave this up, and then we're going to, if folks want to use that, we'd love to hear from you directly, but also through this poll. So I just went ahead. I'm going to select neutral because I want to stay neutral on this as the deputy project manager. You can see it just populated, and that's the I'm neutral. I just want a safe place to view. So with that, my colleague Jamie is going to help us facilitate if there are any raised hands and open discussion. Again, I can't see raised hands or the chat right now, although I do just see that Commissioner Brown raised his hand. So if I missed any before that, Jamie, we want to focus in on the CAC members first. So if it's Commissioner Brown or if somebody else was first, if you could please take one of the CAC members off mute, give them a chance to introduce themselves and share their feedback.
Well, I'm not seeing anyone on the CAC with the hand raised, so we will do.
I think Commissioner Brown is actually both chair and then also on the CAC actually, so that's perfect.
Great. So I am unmuting you now.
Great.
Commissioner Brown. Unmute.
Okay, sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for providing this presentation. This is Kelvin Brown, chairperson for ANC 7B, and thank you, DDOT, for really showing those very innovative designs and layouts for Alabama Avenue Southeast. I think they're very creative, and they look to solve many of our challenging issues around the corridor. Let me start by saying, is it possible to bring up maybe in one screen all 3 to 4 designs so that we can have a kind of remember, because that was a lot of information to digest and to vote on. And then my second statement more so is that I've spoken with not only the single member district 7B09 for Fort Davis and myself 7B06 and 7B02 commissioners. One of the things that we've heard from the constituents along Alabama Avenue Southeast is they want to make sure that the roadway is safe, because we have libraries, we have schools, we have seniors wellness centers, we have churches, we have bikers, we also have residents that use their vehicles. But in the same vein, I think maybe design 3 and 4, where it was cutting into the front yards or the public parking space for residents, I think that would be a no-go for many residents, and I think that would be received very negatively by the community at large. The first 2 designs that showed either the median with a extended 4-foot trail, and you maybe utilizing some of the parking space on the north side of Alabama Southeast might be a better option. Third comment is that specifically, one of the major concerns that we hear is that illegal passing and racing on Alabama Avenue Southeast. And so whatever design that helps to eliminate that, but still provides safe access and egress for emergency vehicles, is highly preferred.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Sorry, I'm trying to balance bringing it up at all the screens at the same time. If I can get something better, that's a great note. If and when we give this presentation again, that's a great note for me to have that slide at the end where we can see multiples at the same time. So thank you for that feedback. That's really helpful. And thank you for those comments. Yeah, we definitely just want to recognize we understand there are trade-offs in this. We can totally respect and understand that for folks that this is perceived as front yards. Again, it is public space, it's public parking, but for all intents and purposes, it really feels and looks like a front yard. We understand that there's trade-offs, and what from us as someone passing by might just be 4 feet or even just 14 feet, maybe a tough pill to swallow. And so we want to have that engagement, have those conversations too. But we also don't want to necessarily close it off, and we might be surprised where maybe someone is more open to using some of that space if it gets them some more trees and so on. So yeah, we definitely understand that there are going to be pros and cons in those trade-offs, and appreciate your comments.
So I see that Anthony has his hand raised, but he doesn't have a microphone beside your name. So would it be possible, Anthony, for you to type your question either in the chat box or in the Q&A, and we can read that aloud?
And Jamie, obviously I want to, this is just, CAC meetings. I want to be mindful and make sure that all CAC members that are in attendance have a chance to respond. But, if we've got till 8 o'clock, so if there are other folks, we're happy to give other folks a chance to weigh in and share their thoughts as well.
So he just said, I can't hear anything. Danica, are you able to speak with him and maybe work through those tech issues?
Yeah, I'm going to bring up that initial one. And sorry, was it Anthony? Anthony, I think was the name.
Correct.
If you're on the call, you should be able to call 202-997-8354. That should connect you to Danica, and she can hopefully help you with the technical issues.
But in the meantime, Brenda has her hand raised, so I'm going to unmute her. Brenda, you should be able to speak.
Brenda Richardson here from Ward 8. I thank you so much for the presentation. It's fascinating. But I'm just curious, as you look at whatever concept that the community wants, I'm just afraid that if you look at where the Giant is, and they've got those yellow, what do you call those yellow things in the middle of the road?
Flex posts.
Yeah, they got the flex posts. So we could not enter at the end where the IHOP is. So they created their own entrance to get into IHOP and tore the flex post down. So I'm concerned that even though you're doing these things to slow down traffic and to protect us, that we've got these drivers on Alabama Avenue that have their own rules about adhering to the traffic laws. So I just wanted you to be mindful of that. Maybe you should put something harder up that they could knock down.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's why the median treatment specifically, right? Like in an ideal world, flex posts are not necessarily, where possible, we don't want that to be the long-term solution where we can. Like we want to have safe but beautiful and enjoyable spaces at all where all possible. So in an ideal world where maybe we have those spaces that might be flex posts now, it would be better to have maybe a permanent curb extension or a permanent median with some of those traversable options. Like that's what we want this project to be. So thank you for that. That's where we would be looking for that. I'm gonna bring up the median just to example reference since that kind of talks a little bit what we were saying, Brenda. Thank you. And sorry, one thing I want to offer to that, I just want to say these specific segments, we're focusing on segment 3 because we have the existing bike lanes. This is really where we consider those different approaches. And just getting more into why I said we want to focus in here. To your point, Brenda, further on, I think that one would be in segment 1, further along the corridor. If we were to, for instance, go the shared use path option, it potentially, again, not necessarily along the entire corridor, but it opens us up to look at spaces where if there is that extra public parking, again, we haven't necessarily looked at the entire corridor, it gives us more opportunities to not just protect what we have in segment 3, but to extend it further into segments 2 and 3 and connect into the network, right? Ideally, we don't want to have a bike lane in a vacuum. We want to connect it to a bigger network. So we want to get folks to Pennsylvania Avenue to then get to the river. We want to get people to Suitland Parkway Trail, right? There's a future project to improve that trail to then get to the river. So looking at these options might give us a chance to connect better and not just protect what we have, but think bigger from a corridor perspective.
Preston and Gabe, I have one other hand raised from a participant, not a CAC member. Are you fine for me to?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we've got 26 minutes left, so I
Great.
feel like we've been pretty efficient with our time. I didn't go on too long, I think. So let's open it up.
Gabe, you're now unmuted if you'd like to speak.
Hey, how's everybody doing? My name is Dave Hoagland, so I'm the president of the District of Columbia Firefighters Association, IFF Local 36. So I represent all active firefighters in the District of Columbia. So I want to drop in. I want to thank Sabrina Lewis for the invite. She was sort of had inquired about this project, and we get a lot of inquiries about the bike lane projects throughout the district just because of people's concerns over emergency vehicles. And some of these traffic calming measures. So I just wanted to give my perspective. Obviously, it's it's the community's choice. I'm a resident of Ward 5. I was a driver at Engine 30 and spent 9 years in Engine 30, which is at East Capitol and 49th Street. So the institutional perspective that I can provide is this entire corridor of Alabama Avenue is a very heavily frequented corridor by emergency vehicles, and all of the firehouses that use it are not only the busiest firehouses in the district, but they're some of the busiest firehouses in the nation. So from our perspective, these traffic calming measures can also often be very proactive, right? Because we've run a lot of these tragic incidents where pedestrians are killed, etc. Fire apparatus, I wish I could say that technology was improving to make them smaller, but with enhanced emission standards, they're only getting larger. And even electric fire trucks that are in the works, their wheelbases are even longer than the current diesel-powered fire trucks. So our general preference is just to have plenty of room to maneuver around drivers. A couple just anecdotes about this specific section we're discussing tonight. There's two streets that come to mind. One is Baker Lane is only accessed off of Alabama Avenue. There's also that water tower back there, which ironically, we actually had a notable incident within the last calendar year where that water tower actually caught on fire. There's also some Alabama Avenue addresses, 4139 to 4145, I believe. They're actually a small alley accessed only off of Alabama Avenue. So it sounds like DDOT has some really creative solutions to allow for adequate apparatus access up and down there. But I just want to an example of a lot of feedback that we get from our members, and we have a lot of members who live in Ward 7 and 8, but also from Engine 19, which is the firehouse there on Pennsylvania Avenue. They did a protected bike lanes project on Minnesota Avenue that runs up to East Capitol Street. And I routinely get videos from my members, especially during rush hour, because as all of you know, people try to avoid traffic on 295. So they get off of Pennsylvania Avenue and they try to ride Minnesota all the way up to Eastern. If there's an emergency incident, there's nowhere for the vehicles to yield. So it really slows down apparatus's ability to go to those emergencies. And then some of these medians and these pedestrian curb cuts, we have to make much wider turns, so they're more challenging for us, but that also creates a lot of wear and tear on our apparatus, which are now $1 million plus machines. So that's just another cost impact on the district. That being said, these alternative options sound, like the flat medians. That sounds like a good option as long as we have essentially a full lane of traffic to pull around other vehicles. That generally creates good access for us. But I just wanted to flag as we look at alternative routes too, especially during my career, I've been to a lot of pretty significant fires in those neighborhoods. While this sometimes some of these protected projects might be more feasible, I just want to just highlight to the community that that's just a very well-traveled thoroughfare. We try to cut through Fort DuPont Park if it's a run that's south of Pennsylvania Avenue, if you're coming from the north, and then vice versa if you're going from south to north. But I just wanted to let everybody know those are a couple of things that mindful of, because I know everybody's always worried about emergency vehicle access. I also want to note that those bollards and stuff, the plastic bollards that they put around fire hydrants, that's no big deal for us. We can get around those. That doesn't block our access to be able to get water or anything like that. But just keep in mind, our fire engines, they have 500 gallons of water. They're very heavy machines. We're not exploring speed bumps here, but some things that some other jurisdictions do with speed bumps is they put curb cuts in for heavy apparatus with wider wheelbases. But anyhow, so I just wanted to let everybody know that there's multiple firehouses throughout Ward 7 and Ward 8 that use Alabama Avenue in their responses. But as long as there's a way for vehicles to pull and yield away, it doesn't necessarily create significant issues for us as long as there's room. And it sounds like this corridor is wide enough that it would probably allow for us to get around traffic if we need to. And I'm also, I also agree with some of the earlier speakers. Obviously, that might be a little bit of a tough for all those residents who have those homes on Alabama Avenue. I'm sure even if it's not their front yard, it would feel like their front yard. So I totally understand that. So it's unfortunate that the other side, which is the park, doesn't have more flexibility, because I think that would make more sense. But I also understand the issues with grading and everything like that. But just want to let you all know that's kind of our perspective. And we also, our fire prevention division communicates pretty regularly with DDOT as well, just to make sure in more higher dense areas with larger, taller buildings that we still have access to those. So I just want to jump on and introduce myself and let everybody know that the Firefighters Association is here as a resource. And you can always do an information request from the fire and EMS department. But to figure out if you actually want actual hard data on how many incidents are up and down that corridor. But I just wanted to let everybody know that it is a well-traveled thoroughfare for our apparatus. Thank you. Thanks everyone for their time.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
And while I've got you, actually, since we're at our CAC and a sounding board, I know you mentioned for the flex posts when they're right there by the fire hydrant. We sometimes get feedback where people aren't the biggest fans of the flex posts, and we understand they're not always people's number one choice. Would a planter box in that no parking area, which I think 10 or so feet or whatever for the no in either direction for the fire hydrant, would a planter being there to keep somebody from parking be an obstruction for you, or is that something you could also easily get around? When we again looking for these flexible options that keeps a car not being there, but maybe someone doesn't have flex post. Would that be an issue in your view?
Yeah, so probably not in the sense of because a lot of what we do on emergency incidents is we position, once we have an emergency incident, we try to position the apparatus so that no vehicles can get around us, because we don't want people running over the hose. The hose that we use to connect to the fire hydrant, we're either taking it out of our hose bed, which is 1,600 feet of hose, and laying it on the ground, and then another fire engine comes and hooks up to the hydrant. But the length of hose that we use to hook up to the hydrant is 20 feet long. So as long as the planter box is not creating more than a 20 feet distance from the front or rear of the fire engine where those hookups are, then that is certainly a feasible option.
Got it. Yeah, again, we want to be flexible. We know we've got to keep those spaces clear. We know some folks don't like the flex post to do so we're just wanting to make sure we can consider options.
Yeah, and I think too, that the firehouse people, if you think up of East Capitol and Benning Road and Central Avenue, and everybody would cut up Central Avenue from the shrimp boat, and then they put the flex post there. When that first started, we would end up just driving over them if we had to get there. And then that's the other problem, right, is vehicles will drive over them if they're trying to get around them, and then they always end up needing to get replaced, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. I did see, I wanted to answer a question about if these concepts propose changes to bus stops. So currently we're looking specifically at this segment 3 and different ways to reconfigure or make use of the space. This project broadly does look at rebalancing bus stops in a way that provides for the most efficient bus service. These specific alternatives, we're not necessarily at that stage to get to those nuances. I think based on my understanding of how the bus team comes to those decisions, right? It's about there's a range of ideal spacing for bus service so that you have the right number of stops for access, but also you don't have too many that then actually ends up slowing down the bus and making it worse. I ride the bus a lot on U Street in Ward 1, and that can really slow down bus service. So these specific plans, no, we're not at the stage to determine. And I imagine for our bus team, it may affect some of the nuances of what that specific bus stop looks like, but we would still be targeting roughly the same area that we've proposed already in those draft treatment plans. So these wouldn't necessarily have significant implications on where they are along the corridor. That's kind of, we're looking at that corridor wide viewpoint to make sure it's the most efficient and effective use for bus service.
Yeah, we're also looking at relocating some of them to make it safe for passengers off and on the bus. Like some of the ones that are near side, we're going to be taken to the far side, because that is preferred in terms of bus operations and efficiency.
Right. Yeah, I think the main, as I know, I saw Commissioner Brown briefly.
Yes, I was just going to unmute him. Here you go. You're unmuted, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that there's someone from the Firefighters Association on to speak to their concerns as well. So that's really good to hear. So thank you for joining. So along those same lines, how far along the process has this team gotten with socializing these design concepts with other agencies like WMATA and DPW? Because one of the things we also hear is that when protected bike lanes are installed, they become sometimes they're underutilized, but you can't control that part. But they accumulate a lot of debris, a lot of trash, a lot of car parts, things like that, that make it hazardous not only for pedestrians that are walking, but also cyclists, cars, etc. And then my second question is, how are we making sure that there's connectivity from segment 1 to segment 2, all the way to segment 3?
Okay. Yeah, I can answer the WMATA side. In terms of our management structure, we don't have public meetings. We don't have a CAC meetings. Then we also have what we call the technical advisory group. In the technical advisory group, that's where we have all the other agencies, coming to look at the plans, just like we're sharing with you. So WMATA is part of that technical advisory group. Okay, Preston, second one.
And I would say with that relative in that question relevant to these specific alternatives, no, we haven't gone WMATA at this point said, well, what do you think about the shared use path with bigger tree boxes versus the median? Because we want to come to y'all first and ask, is this worth pursuing? Is this potentially a route that could balance that? And again, we know those specific homeowners may have concerns, but is this the right direction in order to be responsive to the community, consider something different than what we've already shown? And I'm hearing so far, yes, it sounds like we're concerned about maybe some of those pros and cons, but it does seem worth pursuing. To the connectivity part, that's kind of specifically why we think it was kind of what made us think of it from the comments from the community, but then thinking more broadly is the protected bike lanes, for instance, like this corridor already has bike lanes. And so there's already that sort of like extra space, if you will, to consider how to reconfigure. And there is underutilized parking. Again, I know event space, there are events, funerals, weddings, things like that. There are concerns about that, but broadly speaking, it is pretty underutilized compared to the rest of the corridor. As you go west and south towards Congress Heights, we don't have as many of those opportunities between the curbs and for traffic reasons, for bus routing turns and things like that. We may not have these same opportunities. So a shared use path that, maybe using the public parking could open us up for better opportunities to connect to the larger network. Because right now our current plans, we're stopping at Pennsylvania Avenue and protecting what we have, which again is an important segment, but protecting what we have and where it exists. If we were to consider public parking again, utilizing that, it may open us up to go further into segment 2 to get to like some of those key spots I mentioned. Where like to me, getting to Suitland Parkway Trail would be huge to connect the area where, because you get to Suitland Parkway, you could get to a future improved trail that gets you then all the way to Navy Yard and Anacostia for jobs and the river for recreation. So that's exactly why we want to ask these questions and see what's worth it. Because if we consider these alternatives, I personally think the community will ultimately tell us what they think. It opens us up to do just that and balance those needs and concerns. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Brown?
Yes, it does. I'm multitasking. I'm at the gym as well. So yes, it does. Thanks so much for that.
And I did see, sorry, I'm also trying to keep up with questions at the same time. I think I covered some of this. And I do just want to, I guess, broadly point to like, I'm not sure if you've seen news articles about it recently, but like our capital bike share data and like our capital bike share, and then also like all of the different scooter and what we call micro mobility companies, so the scooters and the different like shareable bikes and so on. We're seeing like record breaking numbers, and they keep on record breaking. And there were some recent graphics that I saw an article where like, east of the river and in places that, especially if they're not near like metro stations, we're seeing growth pretty much across the district. And so balancing those needs of the parking, but then also these alternative options for folks who want to use them. It's hard to answer on like one specific quarter exactly how many people are going to use it, but broadly speaking across the entire area, we are just seeing like insane growth in these numbers. I think Capital Bike Share has like broken its all-time high for like a given month quite a few times this year. So it is something that we need to make sure we can accommodate, because at this point we're just seeing sort of an upward trend in that type of usage.
I'm gonna unmute Elizabeth now.
Okay.
Okay, Elizabeth, you can speak.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Harshaw. I live on 34th Street, right at the intersection of Alabama Avenue, so I can spit on it. I appreciate the traffic calming efforts and all of the dialogue here. Just a few questions. There are some comments put in the chat. Folks, particularly the DDOT folks, you will review that at some later time. Thank you. There was a share about how there's a committee of government officials that you consult with, and WMATA is part of that group. Is DPW part of that group? And I ask because trash really is a thing over here, and these traffic calming efforts really do collect a lot of trash. So is DPW part of that group?
Gabe, do you have the answer to that question?
DPW,
And if not,
no,
we can find. If not,
no,
we can
no,
find out.
yeah,
Okay.
no.
If they're not, I really would recommend there be some engagement. I mean, because they're the ones who've got to clean up these mediums and
Okay.
clean up the streets.
Yeah, we'll include them if they're not in the group, and we also will inform them
Yeah.
about this issue.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all I had. Thank you. Oh, actually, and I'm sorry, one last thing. I appreciate that last comment about the bike share and there being some review of the use of bikes and alternative modes of transportation, because I do question the utilization of the bike lanes in certain segments of the city. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a tough balance. It's sort of if you build it, they will come. And all of the data we're seeing is people really are coming. And so we want to try to balance that and make sure we have a safe place for people to use them, regardless of the approach. Again, obviously we presented some alternative configurations, but thank you, Elizabeth. Any other comment? I'm going to pat myself on the back. I can be pretty verbose. I'm proud I didn't talk past 8 o'clock and gave everybody a chance to talk. Do we have any extra comments or questions in the chat, or anybody wants to?
Question from Mildred Lewis. Do you have plans for Stanton Road to Martin Luther King Avenue?
I don't know the answer to that. This project is just specifically looking at Alabama Avenue. I can, if you repeat that, I can follow up with our bike folks to understand. My understanding is they're working on a strategic bike plan broadly, but I don't have the answer, and but I can try to ask. Was Stanton Road from where to where?
It's Stanton Road to MLK.
I'm personally unaware, but I will certainly ask.
Hey, Preston.
Hmm?
Hi, this is Tyler. Just to clarify, I was actually about to respond to that in the chat. I actually think that this area of Alabama between Stanton and MLK is a part of segment 1. I think that's what the question is. I think she's asking if we have plans for that portion of Alabama. And I know that segment 3 will help us determine the best path forward.
Got it. Absolutely. Yes, we do have plans, and those actually we have shared plans for, and I put this up here for everyone. We have proposed draft plans for the entire 4.3 miles posted on our website. It's a pretty large PDF, so I'd recommend downloading it, looking at it offline, that we can share with you. They're on the website. If you're having trouble finding those, happy to get them to you, or to have like an email correspondence if there's really specific, if you'd want to dive in deeper along, roughly the giant area, if you're talking about Stanton Road, we can do so. But yes, we do have it for the entire corridor, that draft treatments that we're now thinking about how the best way to make, targeted revisions to incorporate public feedback.
And I see Anthony has his hand up, so I'm going to unmute you, Anthony. You should be able to speak now.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Pastor, excuse me, Pastor Anthony Menta. And I'm actually concerned, and maybe you can give me some direction here. I'm concerned about a different part of Alabama Avenue, and I see now that this platform was not designed to actually address the area I was questioning, and I wanted to know how I could find out about what decisions may have been made, or because I'm just hearing about this, about near the 4600 block of Alabama Avenue.
The, um, um, with regards to the project, no decision has been made, about what is going where yet. We are still collecting feedbacks from you and the general public about this. The meeting we had in March, we presented the full corridor of potential options to go where, right? But no decision has been made. The meeting tonight is specifically to go over these different segments with shared use paths and other alternatives to see what you prefer. Before we leave the meeting, we would like to get the consensus or what people prefer based on that Slido that he shared with you before. So if we were able to get the preference, then we can see how we can now accommodate it among the whole corridor, if possible.
But Pastor Anthony, speak that we do have a plan on the website that would talk about that specific block, and I can't see it the chat while I'm sharing my screen, but we can drop the link to the project website. I'm sure if somebody, again, I'm going to unshare my screen real quick so I can drop that in the chat, where there's different ways where it'll show you how you can engage with this project and provide that specific feedback and view those plans. And we'd be happy to take your email address and have a correspondence if there's a really specific segment outside of the segment 3 that you want to have a conversation about. We're more than happy to have that, like, individual targeted outreach.
Oh, thank you so much. I will put my email address in the chat.
Okay, and I just shared the project email. Sorry, not the project email, the Project Broadly website, and then I'm putting in the project documents page second, which at the bottom under public meetings has safety improvement areas. That's the full quarter PDF with the draft plans. And then we will be posting this presentation on the CAC portion of the website at a future date as well. So you'll be able to see what I presented. Just like we've done for past CAC meetings, you'll be able to reference that as well.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Also, this is not gonna be our last, communication with you or the public. We are still in the data gathering phase. So after we collect all the feedbacks, we're gonna be coming back to you and to the public to share some proposals to see to get your feedback on those. So has everybody voted on the
Yeah,
survey?
sorry. I just realized I was muted, Gabe. Looking at the time, it's 7:58. So I just want to be respectful of everybody's time. This was really helpful for us. Thank you for the specific bits of feedback about the presentation, about how we can improve it and make it more useful moving forward. That's really helpful to us. I just want to bring this back up. From here, again, with this specific group, it sounds like the shared use path with the bigger tree boxes is again, of this specific group is the preferred path, or the neutral, whatever works as long as it's safe. So that is helpful for us to know kind of like if there's a direction and we can maybe do this same activity. We don't have a public meeting scheduled at this point, but we do plan to have future community engagement as well as that individual, like we respond to emails, we will talk with people and get that individualized feedback. We'll keep doing this exercise to make sure we understand what the community thinks about this broadly. So I just want to thank y'all so much for your feedback and thank you for your engagement on this project. And with that, I will close it out and everybody have a great evening.